Ever since I woke up from that dream, a vague image kept popping up in my mind, my wife and daughter. But I knew very well that I wasn't married and had no kids in reality. This inexplicable longing hung over me like a dark cloud, often plunging me into depression. I began to wonder if it was a sign that it was time for me to settle down. Although I was awake, I could still feel the tubes sticking out of my body. They were cold and foreign, reminding me that I had just brushed against death. As I looked around, I saw my parents and Vincent by my bedside. Their faces were etched with worry and exhaustion. Vincent told me I had been in a coma for a long time. Only then did I remember what happened that night. Vincent is my childhood friend. We grew up together. He's much taller than me, but his hair is sadly thin, as if God forgot to give him more when he was making him. My feelings for Vincent are mixed. I like him because he always beats our video games effortlessly, which I admire. But I hate how he has this annoying moral purity. He's always lecturing me about staying faithful, which is just annoying for a playboy like me. I often tease him, saying he's just bitter because he can't get what he wants, and he just laughs, like I'm the one who hasn't grown up. When I first woke up, I couldn't stop thinking about that non-existent wife and daughter. But soon, I realized the hospital I was in wasn't a good place. Grayson Medical Center had a terrible reputation in our county. There were always stories of medical disputes, and some patients even mysteriously disappeared. When I found out I was being treated there, I felt angry and uneasy. However, these feelings quickly faded when I noticed the nurse taking care of me. Her name was Evelyn. Her gentle voice and tender care were like a warm light in this cold world. Everything about her was perfect, from how she fed me my medicine to how she drew blood. And her figure and captivating eyes, those were enough to make my heart race. I made up my mind that I had to win her over. I was eager to start a family, and this time, I was serious. The closer I got to my discharge date, the more I started to think that my time in the hospital wasn't so bad. I even wished I could stay longer, just to be with Evelyn. But my friend Vincent became a problem. He kept showing up uninvited, always making comments about my relationship with Evelyn. He also didn't seem to like Evelyn very much, which meant I could only flirt with her when he wasn't around. But Evelyn always seemed distant, which frustrated me and made me want her even more. Time flew by, and the happy days were short-lived. My discharge day finally came. That day, I stood on the familiar ground, took a deep breath, and felt the air of freedom. I was so overwhelmed that tears filled my eyes. Just then, I saw two huge trucks slowly driving into the hospital entrance. The sides of the trucks had the logo of Reynolds Logistics. The drivers were talking to the security guards, and they seemed to know each other well. One of the drivers was tall and burly, with a thick beard covering his face and a strange symbol tattooed on his cheek. His head was shaved except for a long braid at the back. When he saw me leave the hospital, he gave me a creepy smile and ran his hand across his throat as if to threaten me. But I didn't take him seriously. I had seen too many crazy people to be bothered by it. Besides, Evelyn was waving at me from the hospital window, and all my attention was on her. Usually, Vincent would step in and deal with people who messed with me, but today he seemed busy. I noticed he was talking to a neatly dressed man with pale skin. They kept glancing in my direction as if discussing something important. A little later, Vincent borrowed my phone, saying his battery was dead. I didn't know what he was up to, but seeing him so nervous made me laugh to myself. Could it be that Vincent had changed his tastes? I'd known him for years, and he had never shown a hint of this before. When I got home, my mood took a nosedive. Even though I was out of the hospital, my mind was filled with thoughts of Evelyn. I suddenly realized that Vincent might be right. I was really in love with her. This feeling was different from anything I'd felt before. For the first time, I wanted to marry a woman. But fate seemed to smile on me. About half a month after my discharge, I received an invitation from Evelyn on Telegram. She invited me to her place the day after tomorrow, saying we'd do something especially exciting. She also told me to come with an empty stomach because she was going to cook. This invitation checked every box I had for my dream wife. I even started daydreaming about our wedding and how we'd exchange vows in front of our friends and family. But just as I was getting excited, Vincent called again. Ever since I left the hospital, he'd been calling me every day. While I appreciated his concern for my health, I was getting tired of these long, boring conversations. But now, things were different. I had Evelyn. I wanted to tell Vincent about our date, but I changed my mind. I was really fed up with him, especially with his jealous attitude toward Evelyn. Today, I decided to put Vincent on the back burner and spend time with my goddess, Evelyn. Besides, Evelyn was already bugging me to come over. Vincent kept calling me on the way, but I ignored him. Not even God himself could stop me from seeing Evelyn today. Evelyn didn't give me her exact address, but told me not to drive because we'd be drinking a lot. She told me to take a cab to a remote little town where there was hardly a soul in sight, let alone a bustling street. When I got there, Evelyn sent me a video showing me how to navigate the rundown streets. In the video, she was wearing my favorite black stockings and sexy lingerie, teasing me the whole time. My heart started pounding, and I couldn't wait to see her. Finally, I arrived at a secluded house. There were no other homes nearby, and the closest neighbor was far away. But what puzzled me was the two long trucks parked in front of the house. Each truck was as long as two buses, and they had the same Reynolds Logistics logo I had seen at Grayson Medical Center. I didn't understand why these trucks were here, but at that moment, all I could think about was getting inside and spending a wonderful night with Evelyn. I knocked on the door, and sure enough, Evelyn answered. She grabbed me by the collar and pulled me inside. We embraced tightly, and my heart was on fire. I couldn't wait to kiss her. But just then, Vincent called again. Evelyn glanced at the phone and hung up immediately, then put a black blindfold over my eyes and locked my wrists with handcuffs. I obediently played along, eager for the surprise she promised. Evelyn whispered in my ear, telling me to wait for a moment and that she had a big surprise for me. Then, she pushed open a door and left. Even though I was already overwhelmed with excitement, I stayed still and waited. Time seemed to crawl by in the darkness. Suddenly, I heard the sound of footsteps outside, several men, from the sound of it. I didn't have time to react before the door was yanked open roughly, and at least 3 men came in. Before I could struggle, a pair of strong hands grabbed me from behind. I tried to scream, but an old rag was stuffed into my mouth. My head was spinning, and then a fist slammed into my face, knocking the wind out of me. They dragged me outside like a dead dog. My head was still spinning, my consciousness fading, but I could feel myself being hauled toward one of the giant trucks. A chill ran down my spine as they yanked me toward the truck's door and ripped off my blindfold. The sight before me made my blood run cold. The burly, bearded driver I had seen earlier stood before me, a wicked smile plastered on his face. "Welcome back," he rasped, his voice dripping with menace. I realized I had been kidnapped, and what made it worse was that Evelyn was standing right beside him, a cold, evil smile on her face. She wasn't the kind-hearted nurse I thought she was. She was a femme fatale, and she was in on this with them. My mind raced as I tried to piece together all the details. Evelyn hadn't been signaling to me at the hospital. She was communicating with this driver. I was nothing more than prey they had selected, prey that fit their needs perfectly. But the worst was yet to come. When I looked inside the truck, a wave of terror swept over me. The inside had been turned into a mobile operating room, filled with cold, sterile medical equipment, surgical lights, an operating table, rows of neatly arranged surgical tools, all gleaming under the harsh light. A few doctors in scrubs were busy preparing, as if I was just the next product they were about to process. Seeing all this, an unprecedented fear gripped me, as if death itself was reaching out to claim me. Before I could fully grasp the horror of the situation, Evelyn approached me, leaning in close to whisper in my ear, "The surprise is here, darling. These tools are ready to harvest your perfect organs. At the hospital, we found that your blood type matches a wealthy client who urgently needs your kidney." As she spoke, her sweet voice was in stark contrast to the cold smile on her lips, sending a shiver down my spine. This wasn't a coincidence. I was hand-picked prey, and they had already marked me for death. But there was something even more horrifying to come. As they roughly pulled me off the operating table, I caught sight of another truck. When its door opened, what I saw inside almost stopped my heart. This truck had been converted into a mobile crematorium. The massive furnace door inside slowly opened, and the acrid smell of burnt flesh and metal wafted out. The walls of the furnace were stained with dark red burn marks, as if it had devoured countless lives before. Evelyn leaned in again and whispered in my ear, "Don't worry, darling. After the surgery, your body and all traces of you will go into this furnace and turn to ash. You'll disappear from this world forever, and no one will remember you were ever here." As she finished speaking, she even gave me a kiss. I swear, it was the most disgusting kiss I'd ever had in my life. I felt my blood freeze, my legs barely able to support me. Death had never felt so real or terrifying. I knew today might be my last day. I began to struggle desperately, but those strong hands held me firmly in place, leaving me no escape. They dragged me back to the first truck and forced me onto the operating table again. My hands and feet were tightly bound, leaving me powerless to resist. The doctors busied themselves around me, as if I was just a corpse waiting to be dissected. My heart was filled with terror, and I thought for sure I was going to die. But just when I had given up hope, a sudden wail of police sirens echoed from afar. The sound shattered the eerie silence, and everyone froze in panic. The doctors stopped what they were doing and exchanged frightened looks, clearly not expecting the police to show up out of nowhere. In no time, several police cars surrounded the trucks, and more than a dozen officers, guns drawn, surrounded the area, ordering them to release me. The situation before me left me completely stunned. I couldn't understand what was happening. The bearded driver tried to pull out a gun to resist, but it was a foolish move. A volley of gunfire rang out, and his body was riddled with bullets, collapsing in a pool of blood. Evelyn and the other doctors surrendered without a fight, knowing that resistance would only lead to death. The police rescued me and took me to the station. Even though I was now safe, my heart was still pounding, as if I had just woken up from a nightmare. I couldn't understand why the police had shown up so suddenly, or how they had managed to save me at the last minute. As I sat in the police station, I saw Vincent waiting for me. Standing beside him was the pale man I had seen at the hospital. Vincent looked relieved to see I was okay, and he finally explained the truth to me. The pale man was a detective. Recently, they had noticed several missing persons cases, and all the victims had been patients at Grayson Medical Center. Each one had disappeared mysteriously after being discharged. During their hospital stays, all of them had received special care from Evelyn. The police suspected that Evelyn was part of a large criminal organization that used the hospital as a front to harvest organs for wealthy clients. When the detective spoke to Vincent, he immediately told him about my upcoming discharge. The detective feared I might be their next target, so Vincent asked the police for help. They gave him a tiny tracking device, which he secretly placed in my phone. Vincent had been calling me every day to make sure I was safe. But when I didn't answer his calls today, he knew something was wrong and contacted the police. Using the tracking device, they found out I had been taken to a remote town. They arrived just in time to save me. After hearing Vincent's story, I was overwhelmed with gratitude for my old friend. But at the same time, a question suddenly popped into my head. What about the wealthy client? He was the mastermind behind all this. Did they catch him? The detective shrugged and said slowly, that truck was divided into 2 operating rooms. He was actually inside on the other operating table, waiting for your organs, but what? I asked urgently. But he was sedated and couldn't move. A stray bullet hit him. By the time we found him, he'd been dead for a while. Okay. Tonight's horror story ends here, but the whispers in the dark never fade. When you turn off the screen, do you still feel the chill and see the eerie shadows around you? May you sleep soundly, but remember, the horror is never far away. See you next time, brave viewers.